Hello, everyone, and welcome to this online presentation, which is all about building your working from home culture. It's a big topic at the moment. It's a hot topic of conversation. And what I want to do today is share with you some really practical ideas about, first of all, where you are with your working from home culture, and then second, how you build that. And because this idea of working from home or working away from the office is going to be a trend that's going to be around with us for quite a long time, long after we over the worst of this pandemic. So I want to take you into the future of work, but specifically today looking at working from home. So I'm going to spend a lot of time today talking about the future. But before we do that, what I'd like to do is take you back on a little bit of a journey into the past. So I want to tell you this story that it's a true story that happened more than half a century ago. So it's the story of Steve Shirley, who's a UK entrepreneur who set up a software company in the early days of computing. So this was, as I said, more than half a century ago. And in the early days of computing, there were three really interesting things about Steve's company. It's called Freelance Programmers, by the way. And so there are three really interesting things that this company did. First, most of the software at that time was based around financial and accounting software. But Steve thought that was a bit boring, so that company focused on more technical things like working for Boeing or the military. So that was unusual, but that wasn't even the most unusual thing. The second thing was that almost all the staff in the company, Freelance Programmers, were women. And now women did play a really important role in the early days of computing, even though they're not always given full credit for it. But still, it was unusual for a technical company, technology company, to be staffed almost entirely by women. But even that wasn't the most interesting thing. I think this was the thing that really made it groundbreaking, that almost all of the staff worked from home. So this was obviously pre-internet, pre-NBN. Around the UK, Royal Mail used to deliver the mail twice a day. So what would happen is that these women working from home would be working on their little punched cards. They'd do their little bit of programming, hand it into the postie, who'd pick it up, take it down to London, be plugged into the mainframe overnight. It would do its calculations, and the next day it would spit out the results, and then the postie would take it around the UK again to deliver the mail for the next round of programming to be done. So this was happening half a century ago, and so this was, quite groundbreaking at the time, and yet this was working from home at that time. So if you think working from home is new, it's not. It might be new to you, but it's not a new idea. And by the way, the person I've been calling Steve Shirley is actually Dame Stephanie Shirley, and I'm not being disrespectful by calling her Steve. In that time when it was a really highly male-dominated industry, if she wanted to get a meeting with a potential client, she'd write a letter, a memo, and sign her name Steve, so that when she turned up at the doorstep, they couldn't turn her away when they found out that she was a woman. If you want to find out more about Stephanie Shirley's story, then you should definitely watch her TED Talk, Why Do Ambitious Women Have Flat Heads? I'm not going to answer that here. You can watch the TED Talk to find out. But my point is that if Stephanie Shirley could create this company, which became a multi-billion-dollar company, pre-internet, pre-broadband, pre-NBN, with all their staff, almost all their staff working from home, there's no reason why we can't do it now. And technology is not the problem, it's the workplace culture. So with that as an introduction, let's look at what we're going to talk about today. My standard 3 rules of engagement for all my presentations. First of all, I want to give you things to think about. So I hope you do get the time in this presentation to do some thinking. So whatever you can to eliminate any other distractions or interruptions, please do that. I also like you to be a bit playful, because we've got some exercises, activities. There'll be time for you to ask me questions, but I'll also ask you some questions as we go. But really, I want to give you some practical things that you can take away and put into action in your workplace. If you're a leader, a manager, or an HR professional, especially if you're facing this work from home culture for the first time, I know it's not easy, and you can't just take what worked for you in the office and then transfer it and assume that it's automatically going to work when you've got these distributed teams. So for those who don't know me, I know many people here do know me, but for those who don't, I'm a futurist, and now I especially help people lead through uncertainty. So it's around personal leadership with things like resilience, but it's also around how you can lead in an uncertain future. And this working from home is affecting a lot of people at the moment. So I'm specifically talking about knowledge workers, office workers, who maybe have been thrust into this for the first time. Here are some examples of some of the clients that I've worked with over the years, especially over the last few years. And I'm just sharing this to just emphasize that the big organizations, small organizations, government, non-government, not-for-profits, and many of them have got these knowledge workers, these office workers who've been pushed into this working from home environment for the first time. And it's going to continue for a long time. Now, this is something that I've been pushing for a long time myself. This picture was taken about 15 years ago. So I've kind of I've been championing this idea of working from home or working from anywhere for a long time. And my regular routine used to be at the time that every Friday would be set aside for working on the business rather than working in the business. So I'd take my laptop and go and sit at a cafe by the river and do my work all day there. Now, I wasn't the only person in the world who had this kind of work style, but it was still unusual, so unusual that a local journalist who was walking by and having a coffee, he's asked me what I was doing. He thought it was interesting enough to do a bit of a write-up and take some photos and publish it in the local community newspaper. And about 10 years ago, my friend Chris Pudney and I wrote this book, Out of Office. It's out of date now and out of print because the technology's moved on since then. But the whole idea was, how do you create a work style for yourself and encourage your employer to allow you to be part of a team, but not necessarily be working in an office. And the point was, it didn't have to be working from home. It could be working from anywhere. So I've been talking about this for a long time. Today's presentation is the first of three. So today I want to give you an overview of this working from home culture. Next week, I've got another presentation, which I know some people have already registered for. It's going to be quite different. It's a troubleshooting session where you can come to me with your questions about this working from home culture, and I'll help you get unstuck, because I've been working with leaders around this for a long time. So I've generally come across most of the problems that people are experiencing now, and we'll have a troubleshooting session next week. And then in November, we'll have a planning session to help you think about the workplace for 2021. So next week's session, if you haven't already registered, and I'll mention this again at the end of today's presentation, but if you go to askgihan.com, it'll take you to the registration page and register for that session. So it'll be very different. So rather than me running a presentation with slides, it'll just me be sitting here answering real questions. And you can send your questions in advance, or you can ask them live in next week's session. And by the way, don't think that that means you shouldn't ask questions now. There'll be opportunities for you to ask questions in today's session as well. Okay, so when we think about this working from home culture, I'd like to look at it at these 6 stages that you could be at with your team. And think about it in terms of energy. So is your team coming to work? If they're working from home especially, are they coming to work with very low energy, or they're coming up with very high energy? And I've got names for each of these 6, so we'll talk about them as we go through, but let's explore each of them, and I'll explain why your culture might be at that level at the moment and what you can do to take it to the next step. And it doesn't have to be going through all 6 stages. You might be able to jump right up to stage 4, 5, or 6. In fact, I hope that you do. Just one little warning before this, because I've seen a lot of conversation about this idea of office workers working from home, and as you know, it was enforced at the start of the pandemic, but as restrictions are easing around the world and even in different states around Australia, I see people talking about, how do we make that transition now? Are we going to be permanently working from home or not? And you see people like McKinsey who've talking about, this returning to the workplace. A very highly respected HR software company has published an ebook about this. Government departments are talking about this, and PwC also has a report about this. I think there's something wrong in all of those 4, and I've just picked a small sample when you're thinking about this working from home culture. I'd just like to ask you, what do you think, if you can share in the chat room, what do you think that I think is a little bit off with those headlines? And it might be others as well, but what do you think? What do you think? So if you're using the chat, and you'll see there's two options. You can say either all panelists or all panelists and attendees. I recommend that you say all panelists and attendees so everybody sees the answers, not just they don't just come to me. So what do you think about these headlines? What do you think that I think might be wrong? Actually, there's two things, but yeah, so Monique says not giving employees an option for how they want to work. Yep. Only considering the workplace. I'm not quite sure what you mean by that, Lintel, but I think you're saying there's other stuff around that as well. Sharon says returning to work and why they're returning to work. Jen says the assumption that everyone will return to the office. So yeah, these are all true, right? So, and Deb says returning is wrong. They've all been working already. And Jackie says, yeah, the home is not a workplace. So yeah, great. Exactly what I was looking for. So I reckon there's two things wrong with this. So one is this concept of returning, and I get that. I get that. Some people say this was a temporary thing and we had to do it because we had this once in a century pandemic. So now let's look at getting back to normal. And for their definition of normal is you're back in the office. And I think the other thing, which is a couple of people have already mentioned, is there's this concept and there's this assumption that there is a thing called the workplace. And the workplace, according to these definitions, is the office. And I reckon that's the first mindset shift for any leaders, managers, HR professionals to get beyond thinking of the office as being the workplace. It's just one of the workplaces of the future. It might be home, office, co-working spaces, airline lounges, self-driving cars. They all become part of your workplace. And once you create this culture where people can work from home, you then create this infrastructure and cultural norms that mean that people can work from, literally, can work from anywhere. It doesn't have to be home anymore. And it doesn't have to be a return to the office, because the other workplaces could be a normal workplace. Something that happened, which I'd like to say this was me using my futurist hat on, and I predicted that we were going to have a pandemic. This was a little bit coincidental, but as I said, I've been pushing this idea for a long time, this idea of flexible work. And in February this year, a month before we had our shutdown here in Australia, I published this to my blog. And this blog post said, "Are you ready for the flexible work revolution?" And it started by saying, for most of the last 200 years, if you're a knowledge worker, you probably worked in an office. That was the default. And I said, what if we change that? What if you thought about the office as being just one of the workplaces? And here are some of the things that you might think about. These are just extracts from my blog post. How do we make online meetings as effective as in-person meetings? How do we include telecommuters? That was a word that was common at the time about people who are working remotely. How can we modify employment contracts? And then I asked this provocative question: what if offices didn't exist? What if they were illegal? And lo and behold, a month later, they did become illegal, and people were grappling with some of these issues. How do you manage when you don't have the social interaction that you have in an office? How do you manage poor technology? So this is something that, as I said, it might be new to you, but it's not new. And I've been pushing this idea for a long time. And I reckon the big idea around this, before we get into these 6 things, it's a really useful frame to have, is everyone talks about workplace, as I've said, as about one thing. And I reckon we should separate it. There's a place that work gets done, and there's a work that gets done, and they can be completely separate. You can work from multiple places, and you can have a team that works in multiple locations, even multiple locations around the world. Today, we're only going to be talking about working from home, typically with the team that you've had in the office before, but in the future, it can be bigger than that. All right, so let's look at your working from home culture, and we're going to go through these six stages. I'm going to stop along the way. I've got questions for you. You can ask questions, ask them in the chat room. When I stop, I can answer the questions that you've asked, but we will stop along the way rather than wait until the very end. I want to talk about these first two together. So talk about resistant and reluctant cultures. So the resistant culture are the people who said, no, I don't want to do this. I don't like this idea. I'm not going to do it. And I'll push back against it. And this has been the case for a long time. And most people had the option of saying, I don't want to do this, and I don't have to. I can work in the office, until the pandemic came along. And then you might have found them being reluctant. They would do it, but they had to be kind of dragged kicking and screaming. They weren't really happy with it. They always found fault with it. They find a tiny little problem and they go, oh, that's it. This is just never going to work. And you might have a working from home culture right now that you might say, I've got a resistant or a reluctant culture. And typically now it's because if you're being generous and you're thinking about it from a positive viewpoint, there are other things going on in their life. And there's been a lot of research done since the start of the pandemic and saying what are employees thinking about now. The biggest thing that they're worried about is their long-term financial security. Can we make sure that it's not just about the work that I'm doing, but can we make sure that my livelihood is looked after and my family is looked after? In a pandemic, of course, health is an issue as well. And many of them have been put in the position where they're worried about their kids and even homeschooling their kids as a result of the pandemic. And then even personal finances. So it's not only what's my long-term financial security, but can I pay the bills for next week and the week after? Can I put food on the table, toilet paper in my toilet? Can we make those things happen? And this is a real issue. And mental health is a real challenge for many people at the moment. And as a leader or a manager, you may be a product director or a general manager or a marketing manager or a sales director, but suddenly you've been thrust into the role of being a counselor as well. Now, I hope you've got HR and EAP resources to help you with that, but mental health is an issue and you've still got to create a positive workplace culture, knowing that there's all these other distractions happening at the same time. We won't go into that in a lot of depth today, but I will share with you this quotation, which I have been sharing over the last few years when I've been helping people with change and disruption. And I think it's more true now than ever before. So Ian McLaren in the 19th century said this: be kind, because everyone you meet is fighting a difficult battle that maybe you know nothing about. And empathy is one of the most useful things that you as a leader can have in this environment. And you just can't judge people from the outside. You may see two people who on the surface look very, very similar, that they may have about the same age, the same seniority, the same kind of job roles, the same kind of salary, but one of them working from home is in this big house, a nice comfortable environment, plenty of space. They like being at home and cooking at home, and they like that sort of environment. And there may be a colleague who looks exactly the same but is in a more cramped environment, is homeschooling kids, their partner's working from home, they don't have as much reliable internet access, they feel isolated and disconnected, they've got elderly parents they're worried about. And so from the outside it looks that they're similar, but they're not. You sometimes hear people say, we're all in the same boat. And I don't think that's true. I think we're all in the same storm, but each of us has our own little boat that we're navigating through that storm. So empathy is really important if you find that you've got people who are resistant or reluctant. The next level is compliant. So these are people who go, okay, I'm willing to do it. Just tell me what to do and I'll do it. So this is okay. It's not good in the long term because you're not really building a culture where people are productive and collaborative and innovative, but at least you're getting some of the work done. And one of the reasons that people are only compliant at this stage is because they are worried about the uncertainty of their future. So they can only see a little bit ahead into their future. So instead of doing long-term planning, they go, well, things are going to change anyway, so let's just plan ahead for what I know, and let's not even try to think about my career. Let me just do what I'm told to do. Let's talk about that a little bit. In fact, the way I'm going to do that is I've got a bit of a puzzle for you here. So this is a puzzle with cards, and there are 4 cards here. Let me explain what the cards are, and then I'm going to ask you to share in the chat room your answer to this question. I've said true or false there, but the answer I want is not a true or false answer. You'll see what I mean. Okay, so the 4 cards, all of them have a picture on the front, so you can see a fish and a dragon, and they've got a solid color on the back. So you can see a red and a yellow. And if I make a statement, and the statement is that every red back card has a dragon on the front, is that statement true or false? Now, that's not what I'm asking you, because I reckon some of you have already figured out that there's not enough information there for you to be able to tell me for sure whether it's true or false. You need to turn over some of the cards. Now, obviously, you could turn over all the cards and then you'd be able to tell me for sure, but I can tell you that you don't need to turn over all the cards. So my real question for you is, which cards must you turn over to be able to tell me for sure, without guessing, whether that statement is true or false. So if you think the answer is all the cards, type in 1, 2, 3, 4. If you think it's just number 1, type in 1. If you think it's 2 and 3, type in 2, 3, whatever, and we'll just see. So people are typing in, and I'll tell you when somebody's got the right answer. You can guess more than once if you want to. So which cards must you turn over to be able to tell me whether it's true or false? So far nobody's got the right answer. Okay. I'll give people a few more seconds to think about this. So far, no one's got the right answer. Somebody has got more cards than are necessary, but includes the right cards. Okay, let me share the answer with you. So no one's got that right answer yet. And generally when I do this at conferences, there may be hundreds of people in the audience, and I ask them, and only a couple of people at the end will put up their hands and say that they got the right answer. So let me answer this for you. So the two easy cards that you know the answer for easily. So number 1, obviously, you need to turn it over to see whether there's a dragon on the other side. The other easy one is number 3. You don't need to turn over number 3 because it doesn't matter what's on the other side because it doesn't have a red back. But you also don't need to turn over number 4 because if it's got a red back, it doesn't give you anything extra. And if it's got a yellow or a blue or a black, then it actually becomes irrelevant, like number 3. You do need to turn over number 2 because if it's got a red back, then the statement's false. Okay, so the answer is 1 and 2. And as I said, when I asked this with hundreds of people, only a handful of people at most will get the right answer. And I reckon it's because most people get number 1, but they don't get number 2 because there's no red, there's no back, and there's no dragon. And I reckon when we're thinking about our future, we've got these two kinds of future, which are a little bit like this. So there's number 1, which is a future that we can see. And even if it's challenging, at least we can see a path that we can create to get there. It may be difficult, but at least we can see it. And then there's a future like number 2, which we can't see. And some people are very uncomfortable in that kind of future. It's like walking into fog. You go, well, maybe I should only think about the next 3 steps because that's as far ahead as I can see. But actually, and especially if you're a leader, you've got to look further than that. Some people are really comfortable with that. I've got a friend who likes uncertainty because he says that creates change, and change creates opportunity. But many people aren't as comfortable when they've got that uncertainty. Let's do a quick poll here with the people in the room. So what's your preference? So the way we'll do this, and I'll paste the poll link into the chat room for you. So we'll do the polls separately. All you have to do is click the link and it'll jump to the poll window, which I'll bring up on your screen here so you can see it. So the way the poll works is I'm going to ask you to answer. There's actually 4 questions that will come up in this poll here. So the first 2 are about you, and the next 2 are about your team. So there are 2 ways to get to the poll. Either just click the link in the chat room and then you'll get it, or as you can see on the screen here, you can go to menti.com and you can type in that code that you see at the top of that slide, at the top of the screen there. So the first 2 questions about you: how well do you operate in certainty or uncertainty on a scale of 1 to 5? And the next 2 are questions about your team members. How well do they operate in certainty or uncertainty? So just answer all 4 questions, press the button at the bottom of the page, and you'll see the poll results come through. So we're starting to see some results here. Okay, and usually when I run this poll, and I've run this with a number of teams and a number of leaders over the last few years, but especially over the last few months, a pattern emerges, and we'll see whether that same pattern emerges here. It's actually a little bit interesting that in this group here, there's a interesting variation in what I usually see when I work with groups. So let's see what's happening. I'll keep the poll open for a little bit longer, just a few seconds longer, and then we'll share the result, and then we'll have a chat at the results. So you can see the results on the screen as people are completing the poll. And what I see, which is really interesting and doesn't happen with a lot of other groups, is that the answer to the first 2 questions how well do you operate in certainty and uncertainty, generally there's a bigger gap between them. If you look at the answer to the next two, how well your team operates in certainty versus uncertainty, there's a gap there. And that's not surprising. I see that quite a lot. But it's unusual to see people who are still thinking of themselves as we operate well when the future's uncertain. And that's really good. And if that really does reflect your behavior, fantastic, because we need leaders who can operate well in uncertainty. The other thing that I've noticed as I've run this poll over the last few months is the scores are generally a little bit lower, and that just reflects the uncertainty that's in our world. Whereas, say, this time last year, people were much more confident even acting in uncertainty, and now they find, well, no, uncertainty is reality, and maybe it's not as easy as we thought it would be. Okay, so thank you for taking part in that poll. That's really useful, and it's really useful to see. And I really congratulate you that if you're saying that at the moment you're operating well in uncertainty, well done. That's really good. I want to share with you something else, and it's about how to lead better in uncertainty and how to make better decisions. I should have mentioned at the start that somebody here is going to get the chance to win a fabulous prize during this presentation. And this is the fabulous prize, a copy of my report about how to build a more productive working from home team. And I'm going to give somebody the chance to win this prize live here. And I haven't picked anyone beforehand. I haven't got this ready. So if you would like the chance to win this fabulous prize, can you just type in the chat room, like pick me or yes please, and I'll pick the first person. You don't have to turn on your camera or your microphone or anything. Okay, so Deb says yes please, so and other people have said they want as well, but okay, but Deb, you were the first, so you've got the chance to win this fabulous prize. Now the way to win the prize is you have to do a little bit of work for this. It's not particularly difficult work, but let me take you through this, okay? And we'll do it live in front of everybody, so no pressure, but we'll see how we go. Okay, so the way to win the prize, I can tell you that the prize is in one of these three boxes. And just for you, Deb, so which box out of 1, 2, or 3 do you think that the prize is in? Just type in 1, 2, or 3. Okay, and I'll just wait. So Deb reckons the prize is in box 2. Okay, let me just mark that over here for you. So just so you know, so Deb has picked box 2. Okay, I'm actually going to give you 2 chances, Deb, to get this. And I can tell you before you make your second choice that the prize is not in box 1. Okay, so you can see it's not in box 1. You've picked box 2. I'm now going to give you the chance to stay with your original choice, in which case you type in stay, or switch to box 3, in which case I'd like you to type in switch. So would you like to stay or switch? Suspense is killing us. So Deb, what do you reckon? Stay or switch? So Deb reckons switch. So Deb is going to switch to, oh, actually, before I let Deb switch, let's ask the audience. Okay, audience, you've seen that Deb has had a random chance to pick one of the 3 boxes initially, and then I've taken away an empty box. There may be 2 empty boxes, we don't know, but I've taken away an empty box and I've given her the chance to stay or switch. What would you do if you were in Deb's position now? Would you stay or switch? So I can see a few stays. Stay. A couple of switches. Okay, so some people are still responding to all panelists, which means, Deb, you can't see the responses. So I will say that most people are saying stay. Deb, I'll just give you one more chance. So you've already said you'd like to switch. What would you like to do, stay or switch? Has the audience swayed you? Actually, it's about 50-50 now from the audience. Okay, Deb is still going switch. Okay, so Deb's sticking with her initial idea and she's going to go switch. So she's switched to box 3. And Deb, congratulations for switching to box 3 because you get to win the fabulous prize. Well done. Congratulations. Okay, so, there's a little bit of luck involved in this, but let me explain the logic behind this and the reason that I'm sharing this with you, because it's got to do with leading in uncertainty. So let's go back to the original logic here. So Deb said that the prize, so her initial guess, which was a guess, was in box 2, and she had a 1 in 3 chance of getting it right. And I think you'd agree that if you stick to box 2, then if you stay, then your chance of winning is still 1 in 3. I could take away boxes, I could add new boxes, I could sing a song and dance a jig here. It would make no difference. You'd still have a 1 in 3 chance of winning the prize. So the really interesting thing happens if she switches. So let's look at the 3 situations. If the prize was in box 1, so Deb's picked box 2, I'd eliminate box 3, and she would switch and win. Okay, so we're only looking at the switch scenarios. Similarly, if the prize was in box 3, which it was, then again, I would have to eliminate box 1, which I did, and switching would win. Okay, so if it was in box 1 or 3, switching would win. If it was in box 2, and Deb was lucky enough to get box 2 initially, then, excuse me, I'd eliminate one of the others, and then switching would lose. Okay, so Deb actually did the right thing. Switching has a 2 in 3 chance of winning, and 1 in 3 chance of losing. Staying has only a 1 in 3 chance of winning. So switching has double your chances of winning. So why am I sharing this with you, and what does this mean? So the reason I'm sharing this with you is because this little exercise here, this little puzzle, is known as the Monty Hall problem. Monty Hall was this US game show host in the 1950s, and he would play this game with a volunteer on stage every week on TV, on live TV. And the way that he would do it is, like, he didn't have a fabulous prize like my special report. Every week he'd give away a car. So he'd have these 3 doors. Somebody would win the chance to come up on stage. He'd say, pick one of the doors. Before opening it, he would open an empty door, and one of the doors had a car behind it. The other 2 were empty. And he'd say, do you want to stay or switch? And the audience would be yelling out, stay, stay, switch, switch. And, this is before social media. But people were still writing into the newspapers saying, this is why you should stay, this is why you should switch. Mathematicians were writing in, explaining why switching is twice as likely to win. And yet most people in that situation up on stage with Monty would choose to stay. And there are 3 reasons for that. One is they said, it's not going to make a difference. So Monty can always open up an empty door. Gihan can always open up an empty box. So we won't worry. It doesn't make a difference. The second was that they'd feel that they'd regret if they'd picked the fabulous prize of the report, the car, initially, then and switched away from it. They might regret that for the rest of their lives. And the third reason is that they said, I've made a decision and it doesn't matter. I'm just going to stick with my original decision, even though the logic says that you should switch. Now, obviously here today, I didn't give you a lot of time to work through the logic, but I hope you can see it now with the benefit of hindsight. And I think it's really important for us, especially as leaders, to be flexible with making decisions and then changing your decision when new information comes along. As John Maynard Keynes, the economist, said, when my information changes, I change my mind. Why? What do you do, sir? And yet, so many people, especially with a lot of experience, say, you know what, I've made a decision, I'm going to stick with it, even if new information comes along. And if you really want to lead in uncertainty, then be okay with saying, I made this decision yesterday, and it was a well-informed decision. Today, new information has come along, so I'm now going to make another well-informed decision, regardless of what I made yesterday. So change the decision I make today. Thank you, Deb, for playing along. I'd like everyone else also to get a copy of the report. Again, I know some people here have got it, but if you haven't, then you can just get it from my website. It's easy. Just go and download it as a free report. I will paste in the link now into the chat room, so you can get that if you want to, and that will be available. You don't need to do it immediately, but you can get the link there if you want to download the report, which goes into a bit more depth of this working from home culture that we're talking about today. So we've spent a bit of time, quite a bit of time, on those 3, if you like, dysfunctional cultures. I now want to, in our remaining time, look at the more positive cultures. And the next one is being more engaged. And I don't mean super engaged and 100% motivated and inspired. We'll get to inspired later. But the real test here is being as productive now as you would as for your team as they would be in the office. So I'm going to run another poll here, and the question for this poll is, how productive is your working from home team? And if you've already got the poll window open, then you've got access to that already. It should already be there. It should be open, and you'll be able to respond to the poll now. If you haven't got the poll window open, just go back to the same link that I gave you before, and you can open the poll. Let me paste it in the chat room for you as well. So what I'm asking you to do, and you can be roughly speaking, how productive is your working from home team compared to working in the office? Okay, so is it much worse than in the office? Is it a little bit worse? Is it about the same? Is it a bit better or a lot better? Okay, and people are responding to the poll here, which is good. Thank you for doing that. Yeah, okay. And so the results here are pretty representative of what many managers and leaders are finding now, that productivity does not go down when people are working from home, even in the midst of a pandemic. Even with all the other things going on, generally productivity tends to stay the same, always a little bit better. And in some groups where I've run this poll, it's very highly skewed to productivity has gone up because people like that they're in an environment where they don't have interruptions and distractions happening all the time. The leaders and managers don't necessarily like that, because if they're leading a team and they're used to leading your team by looking around and watching what they're doing, going over and helping them when they want to, and they suddenly find that they're isolated and disconnected from their team members, it's not easy. But generally, people working in the team kind of like it. And in fact, coming back to the point about leaders, there are many leaders who struggle in this working from home culture. This research published in the Harvard Business Review very recently, in July this year, said that almost half of the managers are worried that they don't have the skills required to manage their team remotely. Actually, let me put that another way. It's not only that they're worried, so first of all, they are worried that they can't do it because they think, that how can I coordinate a team when I can't see them? How can I manage them? How can I influence them when they're on the other end of a phone line or a Zoom meeting? But also, they're worried that their team members don't have the necessary skills and expertise, that they won't perform, they don't have the skills to work independently, and they won't stay motivated. So there's some challenges for some teams to get their team to engage. Now, some teams are already there and they go, great, we've got a team that's productive. Let's look at the next step, which is how do you become empowered? But before we get onto that, let me quickly stop and just see if there's any other questions that have come in the chat room about getting your team to productivity. And I reckon the test is, are you as productive as you were in an office? Whoops, let me move on. Okay, so let me just quickly check if there are any other questions about that. I don't see any. As I said, we'll have a full question and answer session, a troubleshooting session next week, so you can leave your questions till then if you want to. But occasionally I get a question now about, how do you measure productivity? Actually, I do have one about... No, that wasn't a question. That was just a comment for me. So there was a... And also Deb says, woohoo for winning the competition. So well done. Okay, let's look at empowerment. So this is some research that was done pre-pandemic that said that most people, and you find this especially with the Generation Ys and Generation Zs, without stereotyping and generalizing too much, most employees, they want to be trusted where they work, how they work, when the work gets done, and they say, just give us the work and we'll make sure it happens. But it's not easy, and especially in a working from home culture, there are things that get in the way. So as part of my research, I looked around to see whether I could find examples of what people in workplaces were actually saying was getting in the way of them working and working productively and in a really collaborative way in a working from home culture. So here are some of the things that people say. So one is, I can't concentrate. What used to take me a normal 8-hour day now takes me 10 to 11 hours. Here's another one where somebody was worried. She was worried about the fact that her manager doesn't see what she's doing, and that's going to slow down her career trajectory. This is one which says that the gender divide is still alive and well, unfortunately, and sometimes in some places even worse. This woman who says that she works downstairs looking after kids, while her husband has he's also working from home, but he has a quiet area to work in. And now, obviously, not all men and not all situations are like that, but it is reality. Another one, it's somebody who's worried about interpersonal communication and finds it more intimidating to have those tough conversations when they're working remotely. And this last one, you may or may not know that there's been an increase in monitoring software that will make sure that people are sitting in front of their laptops when their managers can't see them. And so there's this person who's complaining that if he's idle for a few minutes, a pop-up will appear on his screen and say you've got 60 seconds to start working again. Otherwise, we'll report you to your boss. So that sort of stuff's happening, and you think, wow, that's terrible. And I agree with you. It is terrible. It is terrible, and you shouldn't do that, and I hope that nobody here is doing that. And I've seen that software. It's been around for a long time. The companies that are selling that software have seen a huge increase now as a result of this working from home culture. And it is terrible, but equally I do empathize a little bit with managers who are doing this, because I think this is the wrong solution, but the problem they're trying to solve is they want to make sure that they can provide the right sort of management of their team members, and they can't see them. And so this is the closest that they get to seeing them. I don't think it's the right solution. There are other solutions to it, but you can understand that people who have been pushed into this for the first time suddenly find that they've got to find solutions, so they grab at the first thing that comes along. And Robin quite rightly says, I think it's a very different environment during the pandemic to working from home under normal times. And as I said, Robin, it's exactly right. If you've got that culture where people are resistant, reluctant, that's exactly what's happening. That's typically what's happening. There's some people who hate change anyway, but there are other people who've got so many other distractions, interruptions, and other things going on in their life whilst trying to work effectively as well and earn money to put food on the table. So it's absolutely true. So let's look at this last area, and this is going to this inspired culture. When I talk about an inspired culture, I'm always careful to preface this by saying, if you're currently working and you've got a working from home team, a distributed team, and you're trying to get people to be productive and just be effective at work, you may think that giving them work that has meaning and inspires them is a long way away, but it might actually be the best thing to get people on board and getting them working. It doesn't work for everybody to start by being creating inspiring culture, because what you want is people who've got work that gives them meaning. So ideally, you've got the best talent. You've got people with passion, and their passion is aligned with your organization's purpose, and that's when you have the best people. And there's been a lot of research that's been done as a result of the pandemic, talking about how HR can manage in the recession, looking at what consumers and ordinary Australians are looking at, what's happening with our labour markets, how we manage the recession that we're in, looking at workplaces and so on. There's all this research, and like my day job is to go through all of this, to read it, to understand it, to manage it, to filter it, and to share it. And even before the pandemic, there was a lot of people talking about how the workplace was changing and what people are looking for from their ideal workplace of the future. Now, some people are in the position now, for financial reasons, they can't just choose whatever workplace they work in. Anyway, you get the idea. But there's still other people who are looking for the best place to work for. And because so much is changing, the people are looking for different options as well. Another piece of research, I haven't got the graph for this, is that 17% of Australians are considering a career change post-COVID-19. So 17%, I mean, that's a small minority, but there's still 2 million Australians are looking at changing not just their jobs, but changing their careers after this pandemic, because they've started re-evaluating and re-examining what's really important to them. So a quick question, quick last poll for you, actually second last poll. How inspiring is your workplace culture? So if you look at inspiring, and you'll see this poll that's coming up on the screen here. If let me move on to the next one. I need to move this along. And the meaning, the inspiring is about do you have a clear vision? So again, there's two sets of questions. One is, are you clear about how we as an organization are changing the world? And then, are you passionate about it? So the first one's about, are you clear about it? Second one's, are you passionate? And the questions 3 and 4, is your team clear about how we're changing the world? And do you think that, broadly speaking, your team's passionate about it? So what do you reckon? What do you reckon? And this is not easy. And well, let me not preempt the answers. Let me just see what people are saying. Okay, interesting. And as I said, the key to this is where passion meets purpose. So individuals' passions. So what am I passionate about in changing the world, and how can I make a difference? If I can work for an organization that has a purpose that's aligned with that, then happy days. That's what I'm looking for. So I'm looking for where my passion meets the organization's purpose. And that's where I find that my work is most meaningful. Okay, this is good. This is interesting. It's nice to see that there are people who are passionate about changing the world and clear that they're working for an organization that is changing the world. And it's also good to see that the team members are also in that same situation. These numbers are a little bit lower now, I've found, since the pandemic. And I think that's because many leaders are saying, forget about our vision, forget about our mission, forget about our purpose for the world. All we care about is getting through this crisis. And if you're in that situation, I feel for you, and I get that. That's absolutely what you need to do right now to be able to keep the lights on and to keep people employed and to keep people productive. But don't let that go on for too long. Look at moving beyond crisis to recovery and growth, and then start looking at again engaging and re-engaging people with the purpose of your organization, and making sure that you're offering a workplace where they can have meaningful work and work in their area of their passion. Okay, excellent. Okay, and the very last poll that I've got for you is, given that we've talked about now these 6 levels of your working from home culture, where are you at? So, broadly speaking, and all these polls are anonymous, by the way, but broadly speaking, where are you at? Given these 6 levels of energy, where do you think your workplace culture is? Is it resistant and reluctant? Is it people compliant, so they're getting stuff done, but only what they're told to do? Are they in the better areas where they first of all, are they engaged? They're as productive as they were in the office. Are they empowered, and do they feel empowered and they can act independently and work as a team even though they're working remotely and distant from each other? Or are they inspired, so they're doing work that gives them meaning and their passion is aligned with their purpose? Okay, and so far the results kind of match what I've seen with many groups at the moment. So many groups are saying, you know what, a working from home culture is, we're not quite at the engaged, empowered and inspired level, but people are compliant. They're getting by and they're doing okay for the moment. And if you're in that situation, fine, I completely understand that. Look at what you need to do to get to the next few stages beyond that. Okay, so thank you everyone for taking part in that. We're just about finished up. So just before we finish, again, just a reminder to you that today's session, all I wanted to do, or what I wanted to do, was give you an overview of those 6 stages and have a little bit of activity so you could ask a few questions, but also get you thinking about those 6 stages. The next session that's coming up, which is coming up next week, will be very different from this. So I won't have the slides. I was thinking of calling it Working from Home Unplugged, and it says as unplugged as I can be while still being plugged in and online. So it'll just be me answering your questions. So if you haven't registered already, then please go to askgihan.com and register for that, and in that you'll get the chance to also ask a question or ask your biggest questions, and we'll tackle them in the session next week. So thank you for coming along, and thank you for taking part in that. There'll be some people here, you might think that you want some help from me before then. If you do, great, let's have a chat. So go to gihanpereira.com. You can find out where you can email me, you can phone me. I do a number of things in this area, and you've probably figured out by now that this is something I'm really passionate about. And as I said, I've been doing this for a long time. So sometimes it might just be an individual one laser coaching session for you or other leaders on your team. It might be, I've also got a 3-month coaching program where I work with leaders, or in fact, I got a client and she said, it's not for me, but it's for my second in command, my deputy, help them because they're the ones who are really going to be doing the operational stuff day to day. So we've got those that coaching program. I'm running workshops and masterclasses in person in Western Australia and online everywhere else at the moment, given the situation. Also facilitate leadership teams around, and it may be about working from home, but it's actually, when I've done this, it's more broadly around what the workplace of the future might look like. So how do we look beyond just working from home? And also, I'm speaking at conferences online and in person, and my conference keynote presentation is called Reimagining the Workplace. So looking at what the workplace of the future is going to look like and what that means for you, looking to get and keep the best people. Thank you for taking part. Just before I finish, my last message to you, again quoting from someone in the 19th century, Benjamin Brewster said this: in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice, but in practice, there is. So I reckon if you've got some ideas from today's presentation, fantastic. Love it. I hope you've written them down. I hope you've taken notes. But more than that, I hope you take them and put them into practice, because only then will you really figure out in your culture and in your current circumstances where how well they'll work for you right now. As I said, we're not all in the same boat. We're all in the same storm, navigating our own boat. So we need to find out what boats people are navigating through those storms. So try things. And as we said earlier, if your information changes, change your decision and make a different decision. Thanks everyone for coming along. Thank you for participating. Hope to see you next week. If you've got some questions, bring them along. I'm looking forward to helping you work through some of them. That session next week is actually going to have people from a lot of different areas. Some of my private mentoring and coaching clients, HR professionals from HR groups I work with in Australia and New Zealand, other leaders. So you'll also get the value of having other people's input. And it won't just be me answering the questions. I'll let you know that we'll also have the chance for other people in the room to answer the questions as well. Thanks everyone. Have a great day. Stay safe and healthy, and I'll see you in the future.